Babstock was born in Newfoundland, a place where everybody sounds like they come from the 33rd county of Ireland. But he was raised in Ontario, so he doesn't sound like that. He's published 5 poetry collections. He's a Griffin Prize winner. He's been described as the best Canadian poet of his generation. I guess a more politically subtle Canadian encyclopedia described Babstock as one of the most influential poets writing in Canada today. Writing in 2002, Coleman at Rotterdam said, "If some poets could be said to be painters with language, Babstock would best be termed as a carpenter." And of course we had the carpenter poet Adam White earlier today. Even literally so, because several of the best poems are about building decks, applying spackle or framing houses. Babstock hammers in similes and metaphors. The flapping tent is a lung on a ledge. The sun is a loony in a busker's fez. I presume that's a reference to a Canadian dollar coin. Yeah. They have not a lunatic on the coin, but you'll explain it. Yeah. Prairie dogs are nervous clerics at prayer. As for Babstock's style, he says his main principle is compression. I have a hard time allowing a line to drift towards prose, or to speak in a toned down conversational voice. There have been fantastic poems written in that voice, but I'm more drawn toward compression and the kind of clanging of consonants and vowels that I fell in love with from reading poets that I like. Among the poets he likes are his Canadian contemporaries and, unsurprisingly, Dante and Shakespeare. Babstock has worked in the poetry faculty at the Banff Centre for the Arts and has held the post of poetry editor at House of Anansi Press in Toronto. He's also taught in various capacities at the University of Toronto and the University of Guelph, and has been a contributing reviewer at the Globe and Mail, the Guardian of Canada. Please welcome Ken.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for a lovely introduction. Thank you all for coming out tonight. And Patrick, again, thank you for getting me over here, and a thank you to everyone volunteering at the festival and that puts these things together. They're a joy and an honor. And this, especially so for me, I lived in Dublin in 1991 for a year, very formative to a poet. I was on building site I was an unskilled laborer for a year in Dublin. So what I learned about poetry is that I did not want to be an unskilled laborer for the rest of my life. So, well, I guess I became a slightly less paid, slightly more skilled laborer. That's not the poem I'm opening with. I'm opening with a poem called Autumn News from the Donkey Sanctuary. So, sanctuary specifically for abused, neglected donkeys, just outside Toronto. And so for a friend's birthday, actually Karen Soley, who read here a couple of years ago, I think, paid for the welfare of an animal for a year, for her, in her name, sort of. And then, because we had paid, though, they began sending the newsletter to me. So it was like getting the title of a poem in the mail, or the title of a Wallace Stevens poem in the mail. Autumn News from the Donkey Sanctuary. Cargo has let down her hair a little and stopped pushing Pliny the Elder on the volunteer labor. During summer, it was all Pliny the Elder, Pliny the Elder, Pliny the... She'd cease only for Scotch thistle, stale Cheerios, or to collect flitty cabbage moths back at themselves from the wet river stone of her good eye. Odin, as you already know, was birthed under the yew tree back in May and has made friends with a crow who perches between his trumpet lily ears like bad language he's not meant to hear. His mother, Anu, the jennet, with soft hooves from Killaloe, is healthy and never far from Loki or Odin. The perimeter fence, the ID chips like cysts with a function slipped under the skin, the trompe-l'oeil plow and furrowed field, the UNHCR feed bag, and restricted visiting hours. These things done for stateless donkeys, mules, and hinnies, done in love, in lieu of claims to purpose or rights, are done with your generous help, in your names. Enjoy the photo. Have a safe winter outside the enclosure. And I thought I would read a few new poems, if you would allow it. Trot them outside their enclosure. The poem is called Dream of the Cernavas Giant. The Cernavas Giant in Dorset, one of those giant figures carved into the chalk, in the side of the mountain in chalk, so you can see it from the air. Now this one in particular is thought possibly to be a hoax from the 17th, 16th century or something. But giant, just sort of a male figure holding a spear, ribs, and hilariously oversized member. So the poem, a bit of a dreamscape, but it's my son who, for reasons, I guess, as we grow up, we start asking questions, but start asking about his family. And so he knew about Newfoundland, but he pushed it all the way back to Dorset, where my family was from a long time ago. It's a bit of a dreamscape of being a father, I guess. Dream of the Cernavas Giant. Facing the stern of an alloy canoe, adrift with a signal, I was crushing my son, FIFA 15, Spurs v Dortmund, as he and I slid past petroglyphs, past pictographs, Jenny Holzer bits, unlikely gang tags too high on the rock cliffs. He pleaded leniency, injury time, that I relent on the gegenpress, but I felt emboldened now, driven, vindicated by the weird rise of rough water and 2-goal cushion. A chop summoned by no gale, but a pulse on the steel drum of our hull. Our boat autopiloting shallows, shelves, explosives of deadheads, and years out of sight from where we put in or kicked off. The white heart line double-hitched to a steel bow plate dragged on the surface. I noticed, like lost graphite figures trawling for whitefish. All thumbs now, I bossed midfield because I could. My Castro keeping his Dembele to heel. My Piszczek always where his Dele was not yet. Off starboard, out over the black serrated tree line, our night sky split its seam, horking up luminescent medieval green fungal light and a red braiding through from a pierced central wound. That display told the time, which we took in stride, mostly, but for his dipping one claw in the cold, wrinkled lake. Once removed moonraker, chasing not the white Artemisian crown, but this primary tone procession of burst blisters. Gasoline wheels spidering black water. Praehistoriae speculum. Leaving his paddle bridging the gunnels, he raised himself to his full height in the wonky boat. 4-1 in the 87th minute, when he spoke up for himself with a conviction, an unfamiliar deep note verging on tenor. He wanted, he said, to not be the age that he in fact was. Wanted to no longer be even the he that he was and could not be. Inexplicably snagged in the cross currents of now and here. He used unfair to describe his allotment as he saw it. That dark wall over there? Tree line, I corrected. That dark wall over there is my opposite and putative enemy. Permanent, impenetrable redoubt. I am a stick thing, chalked out and ditch shallow. Brute contour without mass or perspective. I cannot see even what might be approaching from below or beneath. All ribs as he said this. All ribs, spear, and dick. All cowlicks and a green world visible beyond him. A shrinkage of empire, an unnaming of islands, protectorates, colonies, commonweal held to be whatever we commoners hold it to be. As point of emphasis, he now threw a dab of the size of a highway grader. The boat rocked. When I self-stim, you're not locked out so much as reduced. I spell, can cast spells, trismegistic, all spokes meeting their hub, Thoth in a tub with a maker looking in his bid for a doubled self. I'm sort of fidgeting with eyewear. I've hit that age where sight disintegrates so quickly you can't keep up with the eye doctor. So I can barely read anymore. And a short love poem called A Bracelet. To look at one's own hand in dream is to break, they say, from the misscaled maps of dreams. So one hand gone, not there, in some sense should join whole part to not other. Invert internal worlds, so being in one is identical to engulfing another. Inside it holds a hilt that isn't there, draws one arrow from its quiver. The toy-sized ball hitch on the stopper's chain went in its socket, then wouldn't come out again, or I believed, when I was small. But one gets taught some links are for shorter, deeper terms, some a single ring, like this bracelet is itself the edge of things. I've already name-dropped Karen Soley, and now I have to again, because she's in the poem. Karen and I are friends, so we end up having a lot of conversations that then turn into mocking the other's interests and enthusiasms. So this is called Not Negative Theology. Use shell shard to extract shell shard from the albumen, said no one who's ever read Berryman's Love and Fame. They know how it ends. I did not arrive here via an account of then. I don't trace causal relations to moss-faced dolmens in Cornwall or Navarre or Silt or the Burren, nor to cold-poured shadow in some lunar graben where a swipe at parthenogenesis did or didn't happen, nor to the embodied mind kicking or bucking when haptens cling like burrs to the variorum of sensory nuggets the abducens nerve keeps making us look at, nor to hallucinogens like ayahuasca or starvation, nor that time on the limestone barrens we brewed tea from alpine chickweed, elevating androgen to dangerous levels, earning one of us the apt cognomen, the satyr of burnt cape, the Cape Norman goat. The sadder the sea bottom, the more covered the abdomen in crabs and mites, it seems. It might seem the fens of East Anglia watered William of Norwich's fame at 11, but I'd rather be 12 than Tinder for Christians' fiery self-fashioning. Solly's been mining the age, Riley 10 years mined. Her monks in the drip-drip of their Neolithic dens at the fourth's edge, the fourth's edge, the fourth's edge. Amen. And maybe some of you are football fans as well as poetry. I'm a bit of a Liverpool supporter, but for no better reason than when I was a little boy, I heard Kenny Dalglish's name on the radio, and I suddenly had a reason not to hate my name. Kennys were always red-headed, freckled kids with snotty noses, so I thought of myself, I'm a Kenny. Then I learned of Kenny Dalglish, so I became a Liverpool fan. This is a little bit of Liverpool nostalgia, but not from that far back. The poem's called Alonso on Cara. So Xabi Alonso, the very intelligent, thoughtful, well-spoken Spanish midfielder, reflecting on his time at Liverpool with his man crush. Cara. Cara. I liked Cara the most. He is the biggest scouser in the world. We got on well from day one. I think he realized that I loved football, and he loves football too. We would watch games together and talk about it every day. I think he respected that I would enter arguments with him. He was always very loud. You could hear his voice above everyone else's. I would say, "Cara, shut the fuck up. You have no idea." He liked all of that. The confrontation. By biggest scouser in the world, I am not meaning anything. It was Cara I liked the most. I told him I considered tackling a sign of having made an earlier mistake. He hit me that day. It was snowing and people in Liverpool waved and honked their horns. Rafa said my mandate was to feed Gerard. Now Pep calls me a funnel. Cara would understand none of this and all of this. Cara, you must understand, came to Anfield from Cara Senior. My duty is to be risk-averse. I punch my left palm and say, shape, shape, shape. When Bolton won a free kick during my debut, the army from the defense moved forward and the ground began to shake. It is not a straight line, Cara. Thank you. I borrowed a watch and then did not look at what time I began. Do I have 5 minutes left?
I don't know the timepiece. What time is it?
It's now 11 minutes before the hour. Am I okay?
You've got 10 minutes.
I do?
Yeah.
Well, here I am. Just two poems. Velodrome. So, velodrome. I like the word velodrome, but I'm not a cyclist. Velodrome, and this poem again, I think, revisits Dorset, a place I don't know much about, but imaginatively went back, and this time I got to be a girl. Velodrome. We're not out yet, but we're going to be. I like the buzz through the bottom lip on my Garneau saying velodrome, whether I'm in one or not, which I never am. So then I say easement spiral for a current through the tongue's tip, while in a track stand. Then I might sprint past super elevation to catch residuals from both while pretending I've no brakes, but quads like bags of cement. Head a frozen teardrop suspended from the dark disc wheels Mydriatic stare. A spike of gravity through the skull reinforces pedal clips saying centripetal out one side of the mouth. In Dorset's desert of 76, I came home over baked earth from the Kimmeridge ledges and turned on the Tomorrow People. I bled inside to be Tomorrow People and entrusted with a jaunt belt. My happiness has always needed a screen onto which its forms can be cast as ghost. Water coughed out of the faucets silted. I stared at a cricket bat. I could hear a girl, older than me, in the angular shade of blistering change huts under the cliff at Swanage Beach, crying in her suit, her sandals, for a future she'd not yet seen as it circled a day from before the ones she'd logged. Lapping itself now and coming no closer to conclusion or restart or reason. Just crying then, as we do on days when we've ourselves to be with at the sea. I could hear her. She could hear the zenith's channel knob chug over and click. A court case just came to a very grim conclusion in Canada, in Alberta, and has been it's reopened tomorrow. Well, not reopened. It's exacerbated what is already almost untenable situation between a settler colonial government and the country's First Nations people. This poem is from a few years back, during a land claims dispute, when First Nation in Ontario were taking direct action and blockaded highways, and the worst of my compatriots showed themselves. It's called Caledonia. Then we came out in numbers. Organized as Canadians, we came out in numbers with flags. With flags aloft and hooting, we stepped out in anger and in numbers. In numbers as Canadians, we came out drunk and threw rocks. We threw rocks and golf balls as our patience had come to its natural end. As Canadians, we threw rocks past our flags aloft. Having finally been angered enough, we came out at night with rocks. We'd been, as Canadians, infringed upon, we thought, with flags. So we threw rocks. Rocks and choice epithets and golf balls, hooting. You don't live here, we're proud Canadians in anger with rocks and not limitless patience. We appeared in numbers around barrel fires and spoke. Into megaphones at the OPP drunk, and them we'd had enough of as Canadians. Citizens with flags and megaphones and our rights, and some of our children threw rocks at the very end of their young patience with flags and placards, hooting. Our kids came out in numbers to stand in solidarity with us, into megaphones demanding we throw rocks, and a few choice Canadians without access to that road as our only route through, anger with flags aloft, alongside placards, and our kids, angry to be blocked by them with special treatment, to be angered by rocks thrown in Canadian solidarity with megaphones, and our kids in numbers, aloft in a wind over patience, our only route. You don't have to live near them as Canadians drunk with rocks. We came out in numbers at night as Canadians around barrel fires singing. And I will finish. The poem that concludes Airstream Land Yacht. So I'll give away the end of the book. You'll find out what happens at the end. A poem called Compatibilist. And compatibilism, as best I understand it, is, well, the philosophical position that a determinist universe is actually compatible with free will. If you can understand that, you're a smarter person than I am. So the poem, I guess, is the gears grinding to a halt or something. Compatibilist. Awareness was intermittent. It sputtered. And some of the time you were seen asleep. So trying to appear whole, you asked of the morning, is he free who is not free from pain? It started to rain, a particulate alloy of flecked gray. The dogs wanted out into their atlas of smells, to pee where before they had peed and might well pee again, though it isn't a certainty. What is? In the set called Phi of all possible physical worlds resembling this one, in which, at time T, was written, is he free who is not free? And comes the cramp. Do you want to be singular, on stage, praised or blamed? I watched a field of sunflowers dial their ruddy faces toward what they needed and was good. At noon, they were chalices upturned, gilt-edged, and I lived in that same light but felt alone. I chose to phone my brother, over whom I worried and say so. He whispered, lacked affect. He'd lost my record collection to looming debt. I forgave him through weak connections, through buzz and oceanic crackle, immediately, without choosing to, because it was him I hadn't lost, and later cried myself to sleep. In that village near Dijon, called Valley of Peace, a pond reflected its dragonflies over a black surface at night, and the nuclear reactor's far-off halo of green light changed the night sky to the west. A pony brayed, stamping a hoof on inlaid stone. The river's reeds lovely but unswimmable. World death on the event horizon, vigils with candles and cups. I've mostly replaced my records and acted in ways I can't account for. Cannot account for what you're about to do. We should be held and forgiven. Thank you all so much for listening.
So Sina Kras couldn't be with us tonight, and Michael Laughlin very graciously agreed to step in to the void and the gap. Michael Laughlin just recently published his collected poems. He is one of a number of working class poets clustered around Raven Arts Press in the 1980s, establishing the urban working class experience for the first time as a subject matter worthy of examination within the Irish poetry tradition. He emigrated and lived abroad for many years, and naturally his personal perspective and subject matter changed, taking on a more cosmopolitan and travelled, more European aesthetic and perspective. In the Irish Times, he has been described as a citizen of the world and only incidentally an Irishman, in an article with the headline, "The Ovid of Finglas," an allusion to the great Roman's long exile at Tomis. We're lucky he is now no longer in exile and is living and working again in Ireland, contributing an internationalist perspective to Dublin poetics. They need it up there, we're much more woke down here. But always still travelling. Just recently, for instance, he was right in residence as a guest of the city of Prague. He's so brilliant, even Corkmen allow him occasionally into the People's Republic. Would you please welcome Michael Laughlin.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm not Canadian. Or it's a pity, I suppose. But the Irish do have something in common with the Canadians, that is, we speak English, and as do the Americans and the British. And when I left Ireland, I was very grateful that I spoke English, because I could earn a living teaching English as a foreign language, which generations of Irish poets have done. But of course, you always feel slightly conflicted, I suppose, about that, because if the Irish nationalist project had succeeded, we'd still be in Ireland, and we wouldn't be wallowing in the flesh pots of Barcelona or whatever. So I wrote this poem about that experience and that ambiguity, because of course, as an Irish person teaching English, you're always aware that at some level you're perpetuating a kind of an Anglo-American global corporate agenda. So I'm a big fan of Ovid, actually. So this poem arose out of that experience. It's called Latin as a Foreign Language. Latin as a foreign language. I suppose I should feel somehow vindicated to see our declensions bite deeper than our legionary swords, but somehow I don't. We're a mixed lot here, devils to drink, old senatorial types and discarded favourites, poets without patrons, etc. When asked why they're here, they might answer about duty to the empire, missionary zeal, or simply the spirit of adventure. All rot, of course. No one leaves Rome unless he has to. And not exactly because he has to, like a vulgar soldier in a conscripted legion, but things somehow conspire to force him out. Not all poets find patrons, not all fit smoothly into public life. You know how it is. One wrong word in the wrong ear, one fateful opportunity fluffed, and you may as well forget it. Who understands these things? Some say they lie in the lap of the gods, but either way we end up here, in the backwaters of empire, drumming our illustrious tongue into barbarian skulls, polishing up the phrases of the oafs who govern in Rome's name. Like I said, a mixed lot, refugees all from obscure failures. Some marry local girls and sprout blonde beards and curls overnight. Poor bastards. How can they take seriously those bovine bodies, those gaudy faces lisping bad breath? Who could write poetry for such as these? I think about these things a lot, but come to no conclusion. During the freezing winter nights, sitting round the wine and olives, telling tales of sunnier days, sucking ancient bits of gossip down to the dry pit, Cato elaborates his pet theory: how Rome will someday crumble to dust beneath the barbarian heel, and only our precious language will survive, a frail silken line flung across the years. But I don't know. Who among these barbarians would give a fart in his bearskin for Horace or Virgil or any of us? All they want is enough to haggle with a Sicilian merchant or cheat the Roman tax collector out of his rightful due. But late at night, when I stumble out into the sleet and cold I was not born to, and feel the threatening hug of those massive forests, stuffed with nameless beasts, and the great godless northern sky threatening me with its emptiness and indifference to me and all that are like me, then sometimes I think he may be right, that we are the galley slaves sweating below, bearing the beautiful princess who sits in the prow across the ocean to her unknown lover. It's almost exactly a year since Ireland recognised travellers as an ethnic minority, and like Ken, sometimes I get a poem like Autumn News from the Donkey Century. I like that. Just from hearing a phrase. And I was working in Galway as a writer in residence, and I first heard the phrase settled traveller. I knew I was going to write a poem about that phrase. And my office in Galway was a breeze block building in an area called Ballyban, where there are quite a lot of settled travellers. And through my window, I could see a lot of semi-derelict houses and a halting site where the travellers lived. So I wrote this poem. It's called The Traveller Girls at the Siberian Ballet. The travellers have settled. They have settled for this, the last stop on their itinerary. They have been so long walking, but now the song lines are silent from Ballinasloe to Ballyban. From my room, I see their houses boarded up like faces. Siberian swans have flown from Perm to Galway to perch and dangle on the town hall stage. Skinny, frilled and blonde, they streak the air in this dark town as Tchaikovsky is squeezed through the speakers, distorted and distant, but still delivering big pink thumps to the heart. Leaving the theatre, the pure faces of the traveller girls glow with illumination, like the Buddha as a child. Not quite smiling, but watching in bliss, like an astronaut orbiting Earth in his capsule, gazing on the planet they came from and will return to. Their teacher tells me, they're fine till they hit puberty, then they just disappear. To where? Into the karmic wheel of birth and death and suffering, where time makes them settle, so they stand still for the rest of their lives, camped between avatars, stunned by the shock of unmoving ground beneath their feet. Only for weddings and funerals, fiestas of eternity, time and traffic stops. In the evening, I see their fathers' impenetrable faces as they speed their vans from one end of the car park to the other and back again and again, the children strapped into their cots, to let them dream before they fall, and wake to see the ground rushing up to meet them, making them halt. This is a poem about a dog, a basset hound, who I became very friendly with in Amsterdam. And the origin of the poem really comes from the fact that dog is God spelled backwards. Which again is one of those things I knew I would use someday. And it's from a series of poems called Judaica, which are all poems based on sort of a concept from the Kabbalah. And the concept's not important, but it's kind of hidden in the poem. Elegy for a Basset Hound. Other dogs feared you, perhaps rightly. All that weight so close to the ground, the heft of those padded shoulders, the not so comical teeth concealed beneath your sad man jowls and pouches. English bred and born according to the Basset experts. My neighbour plucked you off the autostrada near Lucca, where you were wandering confidently like a 19th century English explorer, his mind gone in Antarctic snow. You settled into an Amsterdam bookshop, your basket firmly placed between the New York Review of Books and Literature in Translation, where you accepted the ministrations of single gentlemen, but fell in love with my wife and daughter, running away from home as often as you could to climb like a legless man onto Judith's lap, where you slept for hours with one eye open. Untrainable, unbiddable, I could barely hold you back on the days I took you with me to collect Sarah from her school, and you made a beeline through the crush of mothers and bicycles to the class where the children fought to touch your mighty ears as you gamboled ponderously on giant paws like an Ottoman pasha in his harem. And yet I loved you for something else. How on a brown December night, when the light had soaked into the wet ground, I saw you through the dusk of Utrechtsestraat, with trams and tea-time traffic crashing between us. Out of earshot, almost out of sight, you turned on the crowded pavement, and like the old god of the Kabbalah, lost in the darkness and unknowing before creation, you raised your nose and sniffed the fouled air, and I knew that you had found me. Another poem from that series is called Talith. And a Talith is commonly known as a Jewish prayer shawl. And we have one at home. And it's quite an unusual thing to have because for religious Jews, it's a kind of a shroud. You wear it all your life when you go to shul on Friday night. And when you die, you're buried in it. So it's an unusual artifact to have. But the poem explains how that came about. Talith. We sleep beneath your grandfather's talith, fine lamb's wool striped black and white, a giant barcode to be scanned by God, the pelt of a fabulous beast. Little tent, portable temple. It survived Dutch looters and Dublin landlords to shelter in this Irish night, even me, uncircumcised and all too often unwashed. Your father pinned it to his study wall, a flag without a shield, eternity's quilt. Your grandfather didn't think he'd need it when he took the train in Amsterdam. And what, he mocked your father, are they going to murder us all? I read that poem refers to my father-in-law, who was a Dutch poet called Maurits Mock. And he was the only survivor of his family. Everybody was murdered in Auschwitz. And I wrote this poem. The reason I'm going to read this poem is because it's the only poem I've ever written that refers to Cork, strangely enough. And also, I always think of Cork as a very Jewish place, because most of the Jews that I know in Dublin come from Cork, David Goldberg and the Marcus family and so forth. So, it's called Death of a Poet, because he was a very prominent Dutch poet. He died about 29 years ago. And the poem takes as its epigram a line from the Death Fugue by Paul Celan. Death is a master from Germany. Why did I find it so hard to talk to you? It wasn't just your deafness or my own smirking guilt at being at home in this age. No, it was something more. We disagreed on nothing of importance, but I hated your life, hated your house arrest and your own survival. I didn't want to believe your life could happen because it offered no room for redress, and I was too Irish to go that naked. Often you mentioned the Mayor of Cork. How as a youth in Harlem you followed his hunger strike, his slow descent into victory. McSweeney or McSwiney, you always asked, with the attentiveness of the autodidact, but of course I never knew. On dark mornings, descending the stairs in the coffin narrow house, I would hear your brisk shuffle in the study, already haunting your own books, and I thought, it has always been like this. Just once at a party, you angular with alcohol, spouting Hölderlin to some German girl, I glimpsed you as you must have been. Blonde, bony adolescent, in love with that language's deadly mirror, those black waves soon to break in your ears, and your diamond boss's comic despair, sending you out to write poems in the cafe at the corner. After, you built a house in the dunes and kept your eyes fixed on the sea, your ears pinned like butterflies. That curious stance of yours, shoulders bent, head raised, expectant. Even then, in those 50s photos with your daughters, I see how you were pointed elsewhere. Even then, you were waiting. With what patience, with what longing, you were waiting for the angel to return and kiss your heart to ash. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to have a residency in Riga in Latvia, and I was fascinated by Latvia because it's kind of a mirror image of Ireland in a way. I discovered that everybody in Latvia had a cousin working in Ireland, but it was kind of the opposite because I call it upward emigration. When Irish people left Ireland in the 19th century, you were leaving tenements and bog holes and going to Manhattan, for fuck's sake. Whereas the Latvians all had doctorates in Anna Akhmatova and were coming to Ireland to pick mushrooms in Cavan. So it was like everything was opposite. And I was fascinated by this weird experience. And I tried to find out if there were any Latvian writers who had written about Ireland. And I found this book by a Latvian poet called Michaelis Norgalis, which I translated from Latvian into English. So I'll read a few poems of his. So Michaelis arrives in Dublin and he gets a job in a supermarket. Not that there's anything wrong with mushrooms, but so his first poem by Michaelis Norgalis, which I translated, is called A Latvian Poet Writes an Ode to Capitalism. It was all very well for Pablo Neruda, Mayakovsky and all those comrades to write their odes to labour. They had Stakhanovite steelworkers, drivers of red tractors breaking virgin soil. But what about me? How am I to praise the call centre operative, the barista in the boutique hotel, the estate agent renting out boxes to Slovaks? I sit here 8 hours a day in my blue uniform at the cash register in Tesco's, trying to think of a name for what I actually do. My co-workers are called Mariska or Mohammed. I do not know where they live. I do not know what they eat. All I know is we are low-caste priests in the greatest church that history has ever seen. The people come to the altar rail. We lay our hands on the fruits of the earth and give them back to the people who made them, blessed, sanctified, paid for. No, I don't feel up to writing an ode to people like myself. Anyway, there's a party in a flat in Baggot Street, and the guy from Brazil has some really good dope. Another poem by Michaelis. Occasionally he gets a Sunday off, and he decided to go to visit a part of Dublin called Killiney. Now, some of you will know it's the most expensive real estate in Ireland. A lot of millionaires and pop stars live there. But one of the very curious things about Killiney is at the top of the hill there's a famine monument. And Michaelis had heard so much about the famine when he was living in Ireland. Whenever he asked for an explanation as to some bizarre behaviour, he was told, well, that's just the famine. That's why our corporate tax is so high, or so low, and so on. So he decided he wanted to investigate the famine, so he went to Killiney Hill to visit the famine monument. A Latvian poet climbs Killiney Hill. This city has dyed her hair blonde and had her breasts remodelled to look like the whore in the hotel foyer anywhere in the world. I want to know what she looked like before, so I climbed Queen Victoria's Hill to look at the famine obelisk, because I know that hunger is the true god of the Irish. It came down from the mountain and gave them 2 commandments. Thou shalt devour and thou shalt hate, and laugh and dance and sing to fool the angel of death into thinking you're alive. Looking down the hill at the muddy path, I think I see her looking up, half crawling. Yellow maize porridge cakes her lips. Her breasts hang slack and luscious as dying fruit on her rib cage, which trembles like a songbird's throat. Her skin is white as the mushrooms in the cold ground of the Latvian forest, but her eyes and hair are black, black as the wind in the thorn bush, black as potatoes rotting forever deep in the black earth. Just check the time there.
You've about 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes, great. I'll read 2 short poems. I don't normally write poems out of anger, but this is a poem I wrote because I was very angry. About 6 years ago, it was the 200th anniversary of Shelley's visit to Dublin, where he tried to raise up the Irish against their oppressors. And he was basically run out of town by the Catholic Grocers Association and Daniel O'Connell, who didn't really want to be led by an English aristocrat who believed in free love and socialism. So myself and a few people, Joe Woods, and who was running Poetry Ireland at the time, we tried to organise something about Shelley, and we went to an arts official who shall be nameless, you probably know who I mean, and he said, why should I spend the Irish taxpayers' money on a dead English poet? So I went home and wrote this poem. It's called Dublin, 1812. Shelley slithered like sperm up the river into the cold womb of the city, a cold womb for freedom. It washed you out in the grey bidet of the Irish Sea. Cloud botherer, crowd baiter, you were a white mouse dropped in a nest of vipers. But sure, there's no snakes here, Your Honour, Sir Percy Beese. Baronet-to-be of Castle Goring. You would free the haberdasher, make the chimney sweep your equal, and the coachman your brother. You didn't know the ancient Irish triad: liberty, equality, fraternity. 3 things we do not want. Last week, I was at a funeral of an Irish poet, Philip Casey. He was a good friend. In fact, he was a good friend to every Irish poet. It was a very sad occasion, and I decided I'd read this poem in his memory. It's the reason being that I know he liked this poem very much. It's a poem about a mutual friend of ours called Conor O'Connor, who was a poet who died quite young. He was 45 years old, and he was an awful guy, but he was a great inspiration to younger poets because he was so difficult, and he never really got his due in Ireland, and I was very attached to him. And when he died, I tried to write something about him, but I couldn't. And the reason was that he was an accountant by trade, and he had all kinds of crazy economic theories. They made Ezra Pound look sane. And a lot of complicated stuff about boom and bust and how Ireland was economically unfeasible in the long run. But when I tried to write the poem, the Irish economy was growing, and we had the Celtic Tiger, which negated everything that Conlett had said. So I just thought, well, Conlett was wrong. And then when the Tiger finally blew up, I was able to write the poem. Conlett had been right. Conlett O'Connor, 1947 to 1993. You came into the Grapevine Arts Centre like a ghost from someone else's past. We nosed about you like young horses, veteran of the small press wars. I dubbed you the Polish playwright for your beard and flat black hat, buff-coloured duffel coat tightly strapped around your fading pinstripes. A bookkeeper ruined by books, auditor of your own epitaph. You sat before work in the office car park, drafting poems in your old Vokes. Grim golfer, manic strategist, cranky, obnoxious, irascible, and me, the smarmy young bastard, all Saul Bellow to your Delmore Schwartz. I followed you, a surly apprentice, as you pushed through the drinkers in suburban lounge bars, your belly wielded like a meaty fist. A self-taught Samostat modernist, but there was more, something ancient, something spavined, something for want of a better word, Irish. Yet distant Europe was your element, or, as I put it in my prissy eulogy, he grafts an imported technology onto a native temperament. Prophet of boom and bust, I feel your presence with us again, a revenant haunting the halted development, the half-empty shopping malls. We sat in your room on Widow's Row, what I laughingly call my library, your face a rictus of hatred and glee as you handed me a review, in which the Irish Times wrote, "Why is this on the national radio? Who is this man we don't know telling us things we don't care about?" Thank you.
The war is almost over, but the victors are having difficulty accepting, believing that they won. As at the end of any war, skirmishes are still happening, corpses are piling up. The struggle has been ongoing for decades in our lifetime, for millennia in the history of civilization. There are still holdouts occupying formidable bastions of great reputation. The war is over, and soon even the victors will realise that women have won. The majority most of the best books being published these days are written by women. Women are in the majority in workshops at literary festivals. They're in the majority in occupying places in MA courses and MFA courses in creative writing. For a long time, women have been in the majority when it comes to buying books. They're in the overwhelming majority when it comes to buying literary works. Considering that most men write poems that most women aren't interested in reading, as the current century unfolds, is there any future at all in being a man?
Well, actually, I won't have to worry about that for much longer. I mean, another few decades, which we all over. I'm getting out now.
How do I answer this without?
I mean, you're an editor. You've been in charge of poetry press. You've commissioned some wonderful poets, both sexes, and you see how things are. You see how the cards are falling.
To be honest, it's as they say. It's not that there's no future for me. It's that suddenly everyone else has a future in poetry. You know. People of color, women, people of various sexual identities, variously gender choice. These are all simply populations who have been writing poetry as long as I have and longer, but they face far too many obstacles to publication and print, and the standard levels of acceptance that I took for granted. So I don't believe. I don't believe I'm finished. I simply believe that it's a bigger game now. It's a bigger tent, and it's a far richer thing for it.
And Michael,
I don't really have an opinion about this, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd just like to move on to the next question.
I mean, things happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's also good to have some historical perspective, because sometimes people that win the war don't win the war, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And there's what the market calls corrections, like the Jonathan Franzen novel. So I do think you have to bear that in mind, that sometimes you're fighting battles that were fought already in different ways, and you don't see it's the same battle. And it's very difficult. This is something that we argue about quite a lot in my house anyway. It's every single generation who has an ideal and fights for that ideal and succeeds thinks that they're the chosen ones, let's put it that way. So, you know, you might have to kill all the peasants whose land is larger than 30 acres, but that's just a correction. And it's only 1% have to suffer, so the 99% can benefit. You see what I mean? And so every movement has that idea that they're completely justified. And, you know, I was very moved. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago about Margaret Atwood, because she actually came out and said, you know, being accused doesn't make you guilty. But of course, there's a great tradition in humanity of an accusation making you guilty. Back to witch trials, when it worked against women, let's put it that way. So I think that you try and get perspective on this is to consider you may be mistaken. I beseech you on the bells of Christ, as Oliver Cromwell once put it. It may not be what it seems in the heat of battle, is what I'm saying. Do you understand? Do you get my point?
And if there are the battles, then are you content with the opening up of the Irish literary tradition in the last 20, 30 years?
Yeah,
I mean, we don't write about bollocks anymore, for one thing.
Yeah, no, I think I'm somebody who did his best to open up that tradition. But what I think is a mistake, and I know there's some people who don't agree with this, is to try and impose that opening up retrospectively, as if there are all these hidden voices. Sometimes there simply aren't hidden voices because they were oppressed and hidden. And there's no point in saying that, you know, that a fragment that survives from the 18th century is just as good as Jonathan Swift, because I know good is a relative concept, but still, it isn't true that the stuff that's lost and forgotten is just as good as the stuff that isn't.
in retrospect. Now, that would be true now. Things have changed incredibly in the last century and in this century. Now that's an argument, but I think to impose the argument in terms of looking back and imposing our view and our interpretation, every generation does that. But we seem to have we thought we were better than that. We thought we could have some perspective on that. If you see what I mean. Well, we haven't. We seem to have, in the heat of battle, the smell of blood, the perspective seems to go out the window.
Just as a counterpoint, I'm going to say it astounded me about two philosophers, an Egyptian and an Ethiopian, and their work encapsulates all of the major points, all of the best major humanist points of the Enlightenment that we all still cling to as humanists. And they predated every one of the Western Enlightenment European thinkers. And so that's just one of those things where, but yes, they were better than. They predated Locke, Kant, Hume, by 100 years. And yes, they were deemed to be not good enough, B, silenced, and C, forerunners. So, that's just one point, but it's a massive one. It's the Enlightenment. It's the Enlightenment Western philosophy that we still try to found Western democracy upon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just blew my mind that there was two individuals, one Ethiopian, one Egyptian, who not only got there first, but both inside their own thought, covered Hume, Kant, and it was mind-boggling. So that's just one of those counterweight that, even retrospectively, I don't know that we can be sure that we got it right. I really don't.
No,
because if we're constantly getting it wrong now,
yeah.
They just proved sort of beyond doubt that children in exams, if their exams are marked with no names on them, the girls' exams are graded much higher. As soon as names are on them, the teachers can see what they believe to be gendered, then the boys' marks are higher. We're doing it now. So accounting for internal bias, if we have to account for it now in everything we do, surely 500 years ago, the bias was through the roof.
Yeah.
So, in this country, we're a small country, a small population speaking a global language. We're situated right next to another country that has 10 times the population.
Yeah.
That's
like me too. Yeah. It's a big country, but a tiny population.
So we have a very powerful neighbour with a powerful publishing industry with far more canonical power. Their impressions of us can skew our own impressions of ourselves. Yeah. So do you, as a Canadian poet, feel you have similar problems living so close to the United States?
Yeah, and I'm still trying to work out whether or not it's a problem. It's a problem when my ego wants to be published in red, because like you said, power is money. Publishing companies are massive, and there's no way around that, that you can squeeze out one or two, the market can handle an Ann Carson, well now Karen Soley is, but it's once a Blue Moon, but at the same time, I think it causes a kind of a nice blind spot. The U.S. goes through waves of looking only at itself or at England, or only at itself or at England, not usually paying much time with Australia, Canada, the West Indies, so it's a nice little blind spot to work in. I think that it's possible that Ann Carson recreated poetry just by virtue of being Canadian. She didn't have to pursue anyone or change anything. She was free, particularly because no one was watching, Yeah.
Questions from the floor?
They'll talk to you in the bar. Sorry. Okay. Just a chance for the shyness to be over. Any questions at all?
Oh, could I apologize? In case anyone, did I already do this? I was desperate to apologize. In case anyone happened to visit the website of the Munster, of the Cork Festival, and maybe you noticed that there was a nice little photo of myself, and then an 8-page biography. I think I sent the wrong file to the festival. I have a nice little 50-word bio now.
And it's in the printed.
Yeah, but I clicked the wrong file. I sent it to I got here, and I look like an egomaniac. Anyway, you can go read my life story on the website. But I apologize.
Okay, well, while we're in the business of corrections, can I just correct Patrick for his introduction? This is not the collected poems. It's called Poems 1980-2015.
All right.
Because Peter MacDonald, an Irish poet, said to me, nobody needs a collected poems, Michael. And then I realised he was right. So this contains only about half of what was written in that period. The rest is in the bin.